Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to be telling you about this sword right here. It is the Dragon King APOC series katana, and before I get into the review, a couple quick disclaimers. One, this is a review sample graciously donated by the folks at Cast Siberia, so special thanks to them over there for sending it my way. But I didn't spend any money on it. If you think that makes me biased, you know, at the start. And two, I study swordsmanship, but I don't think any of it applies here. This is like a fantasy end of days kind of weapon, or a camp weapon, or a tactical get-or-doner guy weapon, and I'm a couch potato. So any experience I have in moving this around is not really applicable. I'm a novice, and I'd encourage you to keep that in mind as you hear my babbles and rambles throughout the course of this video. But before I carry on with the video, do know that this is about 150 bucks nearest I can tell on Cult of Athena if you were to go and buy it today. It sells for a little over $205 on the Cast Siberia website, so if you like spending more money, go do it there. But if not, then you can buy it from an authorized distributor like Cult of Athena or wherever you happen to buy your swords for around about $150, and that is the frame of mind I'm going to be keeping when I think about, is it worth it, what kind of value am I getting, etc., etc. And generally the bar you expect, because it's not thousands of dollars, it is a little over $100. So you should not expect the world for that amount of money, particularly when it comes to a katana. So anyway, on with the bits and bobs and fits and features. All right, so I start with the end cap, the kasha, the pommel, the bit right here, and really there's nothing to talk about pommel end cap wise because one doesn't exist. It is scales with a tang that is visible in the center, and there are some things to remark on. There's a spot to attach a lanyard here, a hole, if you will, to attach a lanyard, and I haven't chosen to do that. But the end bit here, the little nub at the end, is not uncomfortable. So typically when I use two hands, I'm holding it where this little nub rests in the flub of my hand, and there was no hot spots, no discomfort or anything like that using it. The scales did loosen and I tightened them back up. It was just a simple matter of using an Allen wrench to tighten them up and then go on with your life. And in doing that, I didn't quite get them perfectly aligned, so they're not quite flush, but despite the little overlap that resulted from that, there's still not really any discomfort in usage. I'm also somewhat impressed with how well the scales have held up. I threw this at a tree and the butt hit the end of a tree. I dropped it a number of times. I did generally dumb stuff with it, and the patina and scales have held up. Nothing is cracked. Everything held together quite well, despite my my best attempts to make it otherwise. So I'm going to move on to the rest of the handle. And the handle itself is not ergonomic, but not particularly, I don't know, it just feels very simple. However, in comparison to other things in this $150 price point that try to do all sorts of grooves and generic-y stuff, it feels comfortable in one hand. It certainly comes alive in two. It's light enough absolutely to use in one hand. There's no finger wells or anything that really lock your hand in one particular place, but I don't really have trouble indexing. And if I hold it steady in one hand, one thing I like to do is just hold it in one hand and then try to twist the grip. And what I find is if I can twist the grip while I'm holding it this way, when I strike things, it's going to twist. Now, I can't really get it to move, but when I was striking the croquet stick of doom, you'll see later, and I used one hand, it twisted a lot in my grip. It twisted quite a bit and maneuvered quite a bit in my hand. So some sort of additional tactile something would be welcome here, but I didn't find it to be particularly cumbersome or problematic while I was using it, not doing stupid things. So I don't know if you want to refine the grip for people choosing to beat metal stakes in their backyard, but that was the only place I really experienced it turning around, was when I was doing kind of dumb stuff. Otherwise, it's comfortable, it's simple, and I guess I would prefer a simple grip that holds up as well as this one does, in contrast to some of the other grips on $100-ish swords that have fallen apart or have not held up as robustly, or at least not as well as this one did. So the scales did loosen while I was testing it, as I mentioned before, but again, a couple quick twists of an Allen wrench, which I had in my garage. I didn't buy any special tools for it. It's just stuff I happen to have around, and it was back right and tight, and I didn't quite get it flush, but it didn't cause any discomfort. So it does also mean that this grip, if I didn't like it, and I was, you know, paying 150 bucks for it and felt comfortable customizing it, I could take the scales off and try my hand at making my own, and it'd be simple enough to take them off and put something else on in its place. But these do the job, I guess I would say. They're just not particularly ergonomic, and if I'm striking hard things, they can twist in my hand. But that was really the only gripe that I had. I used it with a glove, without a glove, and I also didn't find that it was slippery when I used it with wet hands, kind of outside in kind of the damp time, and it was comfortable either way. The The scales are simple, they're chamfered on either side, and they're kind of rough looking as well. So you can almost make out tool marks or something. They're not particularly well done, I guess I would say, but I'm not expecting elegance at this price. If I move up to this crossguard area, there's a little notch here, which is what attaches this Kydex sheath thing, retention thing, holder, belt loop, connector, majigger. I'm using technical terminology here, forgive me. But those little nubs hold this in, and I did find, well, you know, at the moment the sword is broken, so it's rattling a little bit, but I didn't find it particularly noisy or anything like that. There was some rattle when it was whole, though, so if you're trying to sneak up on somebody, then you might have some amount of rattle that would need to be addressed in the scabbard. Sometimes people throw like cotton balls or something down there, or plastic or something to provide a little bit of friction down at the end, but then you'd potentially lose the ability to drain, which I'll talk about later. Anyway, this little retention nub did the job, honestly. It would hold the sword and keep it from immediately falling out, but not be so tight that I couldn't just, you know, grab it quickly and deploy it. It also has this little hook thing, which I did not find particularly useful for anything. I can get a finger over it, so if you like to hold swords like this, then cool beans, but I didn't find that the grip was problematic to hold with two hands, so I didn't really use this for anything. It does act as, you know, something to keep your hands from sliding up the blade, but if I tried to finger it or something, I didn't see much point in using or holding the grip that way and didn't find it particularly comfortable. Now, before I move on to the blade, I'll talk about the scabbard here. So this has like an ishime stone-ish kind of texture on the surface of the scabbard. It did have, as I mentioned, a little bit of noise in it, but it doesn't show fingerprints. The scabbard, you know, this belt loop majigger thing here, again, technical terminology, looks like it has, again, Allen keys on it that could make it come off if I wanted to remove it, or I could use this to secure to a backpack or something like that. I would only be concerned if you're walking around with it, it could rattle a little bit, and if I tried to address the rattle, then this drain area here, it's got a hole in the bottom so that if water gets in it, it can drain out of the scabbard, would potentially get clogged. So something to kind of noodle on in terms of ways to solve that. But there was a little bit of rattle, not egregiously so, but I imagine if you're creeping around in the woods in the end of days and don't want to agitate zombies, that rattling around of your tools would be problematic. And it's not particularly, it's secure in here enough for camping, but not enough to not scare away animals or attract zombies, so to speak. The rest of it generally, though, held up pretty well, and is also overall, I think, quite nice for a scabbard in the $150 sword range. When I again think of options that I've gotten from like the Bud K Honshu series or something like that, they were a little less thought out than this. This, despite its rattle, is reasonably effective at all other things, and I think the rattle could be addressed in a few different ways. So I'm going to talk about the blade now, the pointy stabby part, and there's some geometry to cover here. So first, from this little hook bit, there's about a 1-inch ricasso area here, and then the blade takes on some of the profile and features that you would see in a Japanese style sword. So there's a shinogi, more or less this kind of upper part here that's tapered back slightly, but unlike a Japanese katana, this has more or less a flat spine, and usually there's a little bit more in terms of angles going on in a Japanese katana. And then there's what looks like one primary bevel, but there's actually a pretty substantial secondary bevel here. And now it's really keen and sharp. It cut reasonably well, but there is a secondary bevel. It's not just an effect of the polish because that part is sharpened and lacking the black patina that's on here. It goes up to a tip that, well, used to be on the blade, is now detachable. There was no yokote or anything like that. That's not necessarily a requirement, but I would also say that the blade thinned out a little bit more than you would typically see on a katana, and it looks like a katana maybe in silhouette, but not necessarily traditionally speaking. So it thinned out. It made it a little bit lighter, livelier to move around, and I, like I said, didn't have any problem moving it in one hand, but I'll talk a little bit more about moving it in just a moment. To finish up on the sword here, the patina is also all blacked out, so you lack a hamon, you lack a hada, any kind of interesting metallurgical effects are absent on the sword. It's a through-hardened blade, and overall, that's, again, it's fine for exactly what this sword is. It's trying to be an end-of-days kind of tool, if you will, and so none of that is necessarily expected. I would also, again, remark that the patina held up actually really well. I was pretty abusive and did some pretty dumb stuff, and I thought that the patina would would diminish more than it did, so I was actually surprised by that. On the contrast, what I was disappointed by is that the blade was actually bent when I got it. Well, not bent, but it had a little bit of wiggle in the spine. Now, on the surface of the blade, the flats, it's reasonably clean. You can make out some tool marks and things like that, but for a kind of a ninja tool, yeah, I'm not necessarily expecting anything else. I'm not expecting a pristine polish at this price point, or really for what the application and intended use is. So while I'm impressed by the patina, I was a little bit disappointed that the spine wandered a little bit. It wasn't so much that I wouldn't call it straight, but it just kind of had a little bit of curve to it, and that could well be why it was sent to me. I know that I wasn't sent, kind of perfect examples, so maybe that was why this one was sent my way. It was perfectly sufficient to be whacked on a log in some weirdo's backyard, but it wasn't completely straight, and I'd hope that whatever example you would get wouldn't have kind of the curve in the spine that the one that I had did, which incidentally I did not notice until I was well into using it. I don't believe it happened from anything I did, though, because I tried to bend it a lot more, and it really stayed to that original curve that it had. So when I started doing abusive stuff, I don't think I couldn't get it to bend at all, and so I doubt it happened on a water bottle. Anyway, in terms of usage, it's worth talking about some of that now. The specs, incidentally, for the blade in terms of measurements and curvature and all that kind of stuff are in the description down below if you're curious. The usage side of things, this is really comfortable. One hand or two, I didn't have any issue using it in either case. I tended to use it more with one hand, though, just because I could, and it was easy enough to do. And I found myself, while I cut water bottles and I cut some other thises and that's, I used it a lot as kind of a camp tool. So I had some down branches, down trees in my yard, and I was preparing other branches to cut with other swords. And so I was dressing some white pine branches, and the smell, incidentally, was very nice. But I would stick the branches in an old knot and then kind of swipe above my head to clear off all the various twigs and branches to get at the what is remaining in a fair and effective target to test swords on. So it worked really well, was basically the gist. I cut and dressed a lot of these branches. I cut into hard things, and I cut above my head. I cut with bad strikes. The blade didn't bend. The patina didn't diminish. The edge stayed really, really keen as well. I tested a pool noodle after cutting some of these things. It still popped the pool noodle apart, and overall it was just very easy to use as like a general brush clearing garden kind of tool. It wasn't until, as well, I started doing some dumb stuff. So as I noted, I have some downed trees. I've got some old dead wood in the backyard, and I just kind of went to town and started beating on some of these branches and on some of these down logs. And it's worth noting that this is abuse, right? It's debatable. Some people will call it abuse, some people won't. But undoubtedly, this sword is not an axe, and I'm using it as one. And so I'm smacking the edge of the sword into a downed log relatively hard, with the intent specifically of bending it, diminishing it, and kind of pushing it to failure. And the only thing that really happened was the scales kind of loosened up a little bit. And as I noted, I tightened them back on, went on with the day, and everything was fine. I thrust the tip in. I didn't have any problems thrusting. I didn't feel a lot of vibration in my hand while I was doing this, incidentally. So whatever ergonomics have been designed or executed by Dragon King or designed by Gus Trim are working out pretty well here. I didn't feel a lot of shock in my hand, and the blade honestly held up really well. So now it's time to break out the croquet stick of doom. And for those of you unfamiliar, this is a mild steel rod that I put in my cutting stand and strike into, and it is a recipe to break swords. Making it to the croquet stick of doom is an accomplishment in and of itself, but I strike it into the croquet stick, it damages the edge. No sword comes away undamaged from the croquet stick, and very few make it, past a few strikes. So do know that this is a recipe to break swords. It's abusive, I know that, and so if it breaks here, it's not a surprise. I want to call that out before I get into it. But a couple interesting things happen. One, as I'm striking the croquet stick, it's turning in my hand a lot, and basically it's not biting into the croquet stick because it's a metal rod, and it's just turning and cutting into the stand. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes it chews in or bites into the metal rod a little bit here. It's really not. It's just kind of clipping and beelining into the stand. And so I have to adjust my grip quite a bit, and that's where some of the complaints from the grip that I had are from doing this. Like I said, you may not want to redesign your handle to strike metal rods in your backyard, but this is where I experienced some roll in my hand, and conceivably this could happen if you're cutting other things as well. So Most of the time, swords don't turn in my hand in this way. This one happened to. The other bit that's happening is it's taking very, very little edge damage. And this is likely a combination of the heat treatment that the sword has received and the edge angle that has been placed on the sword. It has a reasonably wide edge angle, and what that means is it's surviving. It's sharp enough to slap punals apart, which is good, and also cut branches and brush and hold an edge, but at the same time take very little damage from the croquet stick. Less than a millimeter of damage is happening here, and even somebody as incompetent as me at sharpening could conceivably fix this without too much struggle. So it's held up really, really well, but to get those benefits, you suffer a little bit, and that's where it broke. So I reverse it, and one kind of haphazard strike on the spine, and the sword breaks, and the tip goes flying. So I, again, expect it to break here. I'm not trying to make excuses for the sword, but I am trying to tell you that this is a recipe to break a sword, and so breaking here is not a surprise. In fact, making it to the point where I have to strike it on the spine is generally a good thing in the way that I test swords. But I digress. Point is, one strike on the spine, it breaks. Ideally, yeah, it would have taken more, and I would have had to reverse it and push it further. That wasn't the case here. What it did do, though, is held up really, really well to all the other things. So if you're using this as like a camp tool, the edge retention was really good, and it held up really well, as long as you're using it on things with the edge, not kind of like hammering nails with the spine of the sword. If you're cutting brush and things like that, the edge is got a profile that's going to hold up pretty well, and it's got whatever heat treatment is in it seems to be sufficient to do things that are kind of punch above its expected weight class. Anyway, that is the experience of using it and what it took to push it to failure. And so hopefully at this point in the review, you have some idea of if it's worth your $150 or not. But now it's time for me to answer that question myself. And this is an easy one to say yes to. This is $150 and just a ton of fun. It's fun to use in the backyard. There are things that you can clean up and address yourself. It's something that I think even a novice can maintain. It's fun as a camp tool. It's fun to cut brush with, and it moves around like a sword. And as I compare it to some of the other tactical weapons that I've gotten a chance to play with, well, I think about it in contrast to the Honshu from Bud K. That was like a $100 sword. It was a wakizashi. This one cuts better. It's longer. It's got more reach. It feels more like a sword. It held up better. It made it the croquet stick of doom. I was testing it in similar weather as well. This one just seemed to be more robust and a better thought out weapon, albeit less cool. I did like maybe the ergonomics a little bit on the Bud K one, but this one I frankly like more. I think it presents a better value. I think it's a better weapon. If I go to the zombie tools, well, I'd probably choose the zombie tools, but it's not exactly a fair comparison. That's a $500 sword for the wakizashi version. And in a zombie apocalypse, I would choose the zombie tools, because if I need to make it through a concrete wall or a motorcycle helmet or something dumb, and it needs to last without maintenance, then the zombie tools is where it's at. But it's $500 and this is $150. It's not fair to compare them, and the theories behind them are fundamentally different. This sword feels like a sword, like I can move it around like I do a sword, and if I'm fighting another person who's trying to hit me with a sword or a stick or something like that, this is maneuverable. It lets me advance and retreat, and it's strong enough for me to preserve the center line or fence with it in some way. It still acts like a sword, but it's still quite durable, and I can use it for campy things and all of that kind of stuff. It's no slouch in durability, but it still moves like a sword. It's still weighted like a sword. The zombie tools is impressive that you can still move it like a sword for how heavy it is. So they are a little bit more of a beefcake of a sword. Obviously, you get some durability with that, but it comes at the expense of agility, and that isn't a price that you're paying with the APOC Katana. It's still fun to move around, still moves like a sword does. So I think absolutely it is a fun sword. It's really, really neat, and while I think both of those manufacturers make good products, and while one might be more preferred for the zombie apocalypse, that's not a likelihood, at least not as likely as dressing brush in your backyard or trying to defend yourself from some other person trying to poke you, in which case the APOC may be a superior option. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I do want to offer, again, a special thanks to Patrick at Cast Iberia for sending this my way. Hopefully the video has been interesting. That is all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.